Jim, let me read a quote that you make in your book. If I had good reason to believe that the Gospels were reliable eyewitness accounts, I was going to have to deal with the stuff I had always resisted as a skeptic. Here's my question. Is it possible to become a Christian because of the evidence rather than in spite of the evidence?
Let me be careful how I answer. I think that from my own experience, this is what I experienced, and so I can only explain to you from my perspective. It's clear that God does something first, and He called me to this. He removed the hostility I had, because I'm going to tell you, my hostility was not really evidential resistance at first. It's that I didn't want there to be a God that would change my life in a dramatic way. I was happy being my own God. You know, the God of Jim was big enough in my world. I was fine with that. And the God of Jim also got to decide what was right and what was wrong. It was really a volitional position I was in. I had a certain dislike of God that I didn't want to even look at the evidence fairly. But I think what God does first is He opens the door so the evidence can be seen in a way that for me, if you'd approached me with this evidence a year before, I don't know that it would have had the same impact on me. I think what happens is that at some point, and we each have to examine, has it happened for us? Are we actually at a place where we can now look at the evidence? Has God done something in our lives to move us to a place where we can see the evidence, that it's all His evidence anyway? God does not use evidence, it's a means. I hope that it's the means by which God introduced me to the gospel. In the end, I'm a detective. I'm a skeptical detective. That's who I am. I had to enter through the evidence. The great thing about my belief in Christianity is I'm not finding evidences I have to ignore. There's not a bunch of evidence on the table I have to ignore in order to accept this. It turns out God is the God of truth. He called me and then provided me with all this evidence to verify the very things He's making claims about. It's all God's world, and it turns out everything in Scripture resonates truly with everything outside of Scripture. And once I realized the connection between these two things, it made a sense for me. Not that I am on my own able to examine this evidence. Well, I'm so smart, I can figure this out. Not at all. It's that God does something first, and then I'm able to use the evidence that God has provided to actually make a case.